confuse you.
Namaskar.
Okay.
I extend a warm welcome to all of you. I request all of you to keep yourself on mute till the duration of the course. India is celebrating 75 years of independence, and Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji had launched Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, or Festival of India's Independence, from Mahatma Gandhi's Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in India to commemorate 91 years of Dandi March, or the Salt Satyagraha, on 12th March 2021. He paid homage to Mahatma Gandhi and the great personalities who laid down their lives in the freedom struggle. As part of India at 75 celebrations, this online certificate course on Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy has been organized in collaboration with the Indian Mission, supported by the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, New Delhi. I thank the Indian Mission in Bhutan, Kazakhstan, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore for hosting this course as a tribute to India's freedom fighters and the freedom struggle during India at 75. As the world is struggling in these catastrophic times during COVID pandemic, we stand in solidarity with all of you, and may we all have the fortitude to stay positive and calm and face all the challenges. I'm happy to see all of you today who are attending the first course. Today, I will talk about Mahatma Gandhi's life and philosophy of truth, non-violence, Sarvodaya, Satyagraha, and Swaraj. In the subsequent three courses, I will talk about the transformational leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, the Gandhian economics of trusteeship, his spirituality, health and wellness practices, nature cure, his environmental credo, and finally on khadi, charkha, ashrams, minimalistic living, and swadeshi. I begin today's course on Gandhian philosophy by mentioning that Mahatma Gandhi is not merely a political philosopher. It is a message and philosophy of life. Gandhiji is universally known as the most renowned theorist, philosopher, and the practitioner of truth, love, non-violence, tolerance, freedom, and peace. He was the leader of his people. His mission was to reconstruct society from below upwards in a decentralized socio-political and economic order with villages or counties as its base. He was very much concerned with the condition of the poor, deprived, and the downtrodden, and intended to alter the evil political, social, and economic system for the people. Mahatma Gandhi drew inspiration not only from his experiences in South Africa, but also from his reading of the history of Africa as a whole. Thus, we observe that during the entire nonviolent freedom struggle of Mahatma Gandhi in India, Africa was dominant in his mind, as his early struggle for equality was initiated in Africa. The 21st century finds our world confronting new challenges, no less apocalyptic than in the 20th century. despite the industrial, scientific, technological, and information revolutions. On the one hand, the world is witnessing the financial and economic collapse of regions that owed most to capitalist development. On the other hand, amazing transformations have radically changed the day to day lives in the world for better and, in many respects, for the worse. Looking back from the vantage point of the first decade of the 20th century, it seems nothing short of a miracle how, in the first decade of the 20th century, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi launched his crusade against racialism, colonialism, industrialization, religious fundamentalism, and violence. Let us not forget that Gandhiji's frail figure still looms large as the initiator of a new mass movement for justice and freedom. Gandhiji's core values or his messages of truth, non-violence, purity of means, the practice of diversity, dialogue, and mutual respect are very much relevant today. The Gandhian ideology of universal peace and non-violent conflict resolution is still much admired and resonates throughout the world. We need to learn from the Gandhian perspective, use his inspirational example, and apply similar approaches to bring about peaceful outcomes for serving humanity. More than half a century ago, Mahatma Gandhi sought to break the cycles of violence and reprisal. What distinguishes us from brute beasts, he said, is our continuous striving for moral self improvement. Humanity is at crossroads and must choose between, Gandhiji asserted, violence, that is the law of the jungle, or non-violence, the act of kindness. The world today has an extraordinary and unprecedented opportunity. We have the chance to open a new page in human history. When Gandhiji returned to India in 1915, after spending nearly 20 years in South Africa, he was a widely known revolutionary, political organizer, and a leader who had evolved his unique philosophy and technique of satyagraha or nonviolent resistance to all forms of injustice. He was already being seen as a saint in politics, a Mahatma. In 1909 itself, Henry Pollock, the British born Jew and Gandhiji's close associate, had written in the biography of Gandhiji, and I quote, "Perhaps in this generation, India has not produced such a noble man, saint, patriot, and statesman in one." Soon after arrival in India, as Gandhiji started leading India's freedom struggle, he had become universally known as Mahatma Gandhi. In June 2007, the United Nations General Assembly had unanimously declared 2nd October, the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, as the UN International Day of Nonviolence. There is thus a growing universal appreciation of the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy in the 21st century. Mahatma Gandhi's important contributions for a just world are very compelling and relevant to the world today. United Nations has designated the year 2021 as the International Year of Peace and Trust, and Gandhiji's pioneering work assumes even more importance. The Gandhian philosophy of ahimsa, that is nonviolence, Satyagraha, Sarvodaya, Swaraj, and trusteeship are the foundational concepts for a just world that form the content of the notion of universality of human rights and influence the UN Charter in 1945. On the UN International Day of Nonviolence, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had said, and I quote, "Gandhi's vision and philosophy are pillars of the work of the United Nations. Part of his genius lay in his ability to see the interconnectedness and the unity between all things. Gandhi promoted non-violence not just as a philosophy and a political strategy, but as a means to achieve justice and change. Many of his ideas foreshadow the holistic thinking behind the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Under the Gandhian philosophy, truth is the ultimate goal of human life. Truth is God, and nonviolence is the means to the pursuit of truth. It is best expressed in his own words, and I quote: "Nonviolence and truth are so intertwined that it is practically impossible to disentangle and separate them. Nevertheless, nonviolence is the means, excuse me, and truth is the end. Means to be means must always be within our reach. And so nonviolence becomes our supreme duty, and truth becomes God for us. If we take care of the means, we are bound to reach the end sooner or later. This is the reason why he had always insisted on following purity of means. To Mahatma Gandhi, ethics, morality, virtue, values, dharma, and truth were overlapping, even interchangeable terms. Ethics define what is right and good in human conduct, the essential basis of all human activities and institutions, and truth and nonviolence remained the core of his ethical thought. He defined nonviolence in its all embracing sense as an ideal ethic and said, and I quote, "Literally speaking, nonviolence means non killing. But to me, it has a world of meaning and takes me into realms much higher, infinitely higher than the realm to which I would go if I merely understood by nonviolence as non killing. Nonviolence really means that you may not offend anybody. You may not harbor an uncharitable thought, even in connection with one who may consider himself to be your enemy." Gandhiji maintained that if we return blow for blow, we depart from the doctrine of nonviolence. Gandhiji is the most potent visionary and a practical idealist from the first half of the last century, whose life is a role model for us all. However, the effort must begin from a point where one is standing. And that is what made all Mahatma Gandhi's idealist actions practical. And he can be indeed called a man of action. However, it does not only mean that he was swamped with work, that he was. What we mean is the action of putting ideas or beliefs into practice more than anything else was the driving force in his life. The answer for Mahatma Gandhi was always found in action. He had said, and I quote, "An ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching." Albert Einstein had called Gandhiji as the supreme practical leader for change, and listen to his voice.
I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men in our time. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our cause, but by non-participation in anything you believe is evil.
Nelson Mandela had stated in his message in January 2007, and I quote, "In a world driven by violence and strife, Gandhi's message of peace and non-violence holds the key to human survival in the 21st century." And listen to his voice.
A man like Mahatma Gandhi, he started his political career in South Africa. And that, of course, has established these historical and emotional ties between our struggle and that of India. A
Gandhiji
man like
has been a great light for the Tibetan leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who puts Gandhiji's success in right perspective. He said, and I quote, "Many ancient Indian masters have preached ahimsa, non-violence, as a philosophy. That was mere philosophical understanding. But Mahatma Gandhi, in the 20th century, produced a very sophisticated approach because he implemented that very noble philosophy of ahimsa in modern politics, and he succeeded. That is a great thing." His Holiness the Dalai Lama further said, and I quote, "Mahatma Gandhi is my inspiration." Listen into his voice.
So, in 20th century, wonderful Indian, Mahatma Gandhiji, with a thorough modern education, lawyer. So he carried the struggle, not only in India, firstly start in South Africa. Then he carried the India's freedom struggle.
Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, and purity of means are eternal, universal, and transcend the geographical boundaries of time and space. Gandhiji demonstrated that things start from self. We must become practitioners of whatever we know of Gandhiji in order to get inspired from him. There are so many things that he did. A simple practice could be to become self reliant and lead a simple life. The Gandhian precepts of ethical, political, economic, and social behavior provide a broad framework for the society. Gandhiji's practical idealism and irrepressible optimism, apart from his respect for all life and pursuit of truth and non-violence, can help all of us move towards self-realization or self-actualization. Only then can the world hope to make 21st century a century of peace. Only then can it hope to fulfill the Millennium Sustainable Goals and realize the fundamental values of freedom, equality, solidarity, tolerance, respect for nature, and shared responsibilities. Gandhiji had written, and I quote, "I know the path. It is straight and narrow. It is like the edge of a sword. I rejoice to walk on it. I weep when I slip. God's word is, he who strives never perishes." I have implicit faith in that promise. How does the young generation remember Mahatma Gandhi today? As someone who led India to freedom through Satyagraha, or a man who has made an impact and influenced people across the globe? As a prophet who warned the world leaders that there is enough for man's needs, but not for man's greed? Or a person in a loincloth striding across India to mass worship of the ordinary people? Or a bespectacled figure intently writing original words which added up to more than 100 volumes? Many a times, when his right hand used to be tired, he used to write with the left hand and encouraged everybody to use both the hands for writing. Or perhaps the saintly figure on the spinning wheel. To me, Gandhiji is not a collection of dry thoughts and maxims, but a living man who reminds one of the highest level to which a human being can evolve. Containing the best from the past, he lived in the present, yet for the future. Hence the timelessness of his highest thoughts. Much what he said and wrote was for the solution of immediate problems. Some were for the inner guidance of the individuals. He fashioned his idea as tools during his experiments in the laboratory of his own life. Gandhiji's vision of social upliftment rested on spirituality and patriotism. Based on this, he stated that all humans are one, irrespective of color, caste, economic status, and it is the duty of everyone to uplift his fellow human beings. He has made significant and inspiring contributions that span across diverse disciplines such as economics, spirituality, conflict resolution, international peace, civil rights, revolution, education, politics, society, religion, environment, and much more. At that time, the most harmful and damaging impact on the world was that of colonialism, modern mechanization, violence, war, and the greed for controlling the world. Gandhiji's life left one of the most potent and robust imprints on the humanity of the world. His name is synonymous with nonviolence, social justice, and civil disobedience. Mahatma Gandhi's life at one level is one of sage like sadhana, or the endeavor of disciplined and dedicated practice. It exemplifies the extraordinary heights that an ordinary person can attain through constant endeavor imbued with self awareness. At another level, it is a narrative of an individual's quest that took the form of national endeavor and freed a people from centuries old stupefaction, subjugation, and slavery. In this dual process of purification and the spreading out of the soul, the distance between self purification and social revolution is reduced. Gandhiji's life is an epic of non duality of self purification and social revolution. In South Africa, as Gandhiji progressively reduced the necessities of life, his family became ever extended. As his circle of family expanded, his homes became smaller and simpler. He was born in the western part of India and lived and worked in three continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa. Reporters from all over the world converged to capture and describe each step of his great marches and movements. And finally, his death, a death that is so luminous that his long and glorious life paled in comparison. The story of Gandhiji's life is about the striving of an ordinary man, a human like you and me, and the extraordinary heights that he attained. He imbued the quest and striving for truth from the nectar of life. He defined truth in the simplest terms, terms that you and I can comprehend, to utter as one thinks and to act as one utters. That is, there should be harmony between what you think, what you say, and what you do. The straight path of unity of thought, word, and deed enabled him to incessantly tread on the path of revolution and sadhana. The path of truth allowed him to walk free. He bared his mind before the world and rose above the world itself. He erred like ordinary humans, but before others could discern and point them out, he recognized them and accepted them before the world. But along with the admission of errors, he also resolved never ever to commit them again and remained steadfast to them even in the face of great difficulties. This quality transformed Gandhiji from an extraordinary person to an extraordinary seeker. On the path of truth, he found non-violence. He found it in the silent tears that his father shed on his sick bed as he confessed to his untruth as a child. It also came to him in his adolescence in the form of an affectionate resistance that his adolescent wife offered to his commands. The distance between means and ends dissolved, and it became one as he came face to face with racial discrimination in South Africa as a youth and resisted it with all his might non-violently. As he was growing up, a thought took root in him that morality is the basis of things and that truth is the substance of morality, and it brought non-violence to light for the seeker of truth. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi had already found a path of morality by the age of 15 or 16 years that would take him to the pinnacle of truth. At every step, he examined himself, learned from his mistakes, and resolved to never commit them again. It is through this process and with the help of elders and teachers that he moved forward. Every moral lapse became a step forward for Mohandas. Gandhiji was not divine, nor was he gifted with superior intellect. He was an ordinary person, and like all ordinary persons, he too stumbled during his journey. What was uncommon in him that he learned from every wrong step? According to me, Mahatma Gandhi's thoughts are centered around truth, non-violence, Sarvodaya, Satyagraha, and Swaraj, which are significant to understanding the Gandhian philosophy. Satyagraha is firmness in truth. Sarvodaya is welfare of all, and Swaraj is rule over self. These are the core concepts of Mahatma Gandhi's political philosophy. Satyagraha became the alternative nonviolent resistance and sole force of the oppressed against injustice. Two basic principles, truth and nonviolence, are the foundations of Gandhiji's thinking. At the highest level of experience, they merge and become one with God. The ideal of reality is also the ideal of value, a distinctive mark of Hindu philosophy. God, therefore, has been referred to by Gandhiji as truth or love, that is, nonviolence in its perfection. His ideal of life was self realization. Therefore, it is couched in ideal terms when the unity of man and God has also been achieved. Gandhiji, however, is fully aware that in fact, at the present level of human experience, there is a gulf between man and God. Indeed, this gulf will never be completely bridged as long as we are in this body. Thus, recognizing the imperfect nature of man, Gandhiji's prescription would be to follow the relative truth persistently, which he called Satyagraha. This shows the dynamic character of his ideas. Now I will play a hymn in Hindi and with English subtitles which convey Gandhiji's thoughts in the form of lyrics. मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तुझको मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तुझको जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तुझको जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तुझको ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान. Gandhiji's thinking lays down moral ideals for individuals and groups to strive for. Their value consists in pointing out the direction, not in their realization. They cannot be enforced from above but depend upon their voluntary acceptance. He considered use of force to be an unavoidable necessary evil, but an evil all the same. The extent to which these ideals can be practiced depends on the ethical capacity of individuals or groups. Accordingly, the actual practice of these ideals cannot be uniform. As a social and political reformer, Gandhiji spoke from different levels at different times, but three levels mainly dominated his writings. First, that of the perfect ideal, which is unrealizable. Second, that of his own personal point of view, which was admitting himself to be far from perfect, yet sufficiently advanced to practice his ideals. Third, that of the point of view of the Indian masses. Yet, what is implied throughout is this, that even though the ideal may be impossible of attainment, the very act of pursuing it generates the goodwill essential for the well-being of life. Mahatma Gandhi's viewpoint, which he called an experiment with truth, was not an attitude in which he merely interpreted or analyzed things for himself. It was an experience or experiment in which he changed himself and his environment. In the process, Gandhiji reoriented many traditional ideas of Hindu thought and practice. He said, and I quote, I do not claim to have originated any new principle. I have simply tried in my own way to apply eternal truths to our daily life and problem. He was an ordinary man who became a Mahatma through his constant endeavor and the courage of conviction. Gandhiji said that the eternal truths could be applied to daily life and problems. He said they were everywhere in the history, in unrecorded history, though not everywhere in recorded history. The distinction is vital to Gandhiji. He found the proof of non-violence in unrecorded history, in the fact that life persists amidst death, and there is compassion and friendliness amidst bitterness and hatred, and persecution and war. The Gandhian idea is also compatible with the view that humankind is undergoing gradual moral evolution. While conflict is seen as inevitable, in fact, not always desirable, violence as the result of conflict is not regarded as inevitable. Simply put, human beings do have the capacity to resolve conflicts non-violently. This might be difficult, but it is not impossible. Liberation from a violent society is seen as requiring many decades or longer, but it is not an impossible ideal. As a guide to action, the Gandhian philosophy is a double edged weapon. Its objective is to transform the individual and society simultaneously in accordance with the principle of truth and nonviolence. The historic task before humankind is to progress towards the creation of a nonviolent political, economic, and social order by nonviolent struggle. The social goal was described by Gandhiji as Sarvodaya, a term he coined in paraphrasing John Ruskin's book Unto This Last, meaning the welfare of all without exception. Gandhiji's thought is equally a way of life of self-transformation. The individual's task is to make sincere attempt to live according to the principles of truth and non-violence. Its fundamental tenets are therefore moral. They include resisting injustice, developing a spirit of service, selflessness, sacrifice, emphasizing one's responsibility and duties rather than rights, self-discipline, simplicity of lifestyle, and attempting to maintain truthful and nonviolent relations with others. By simplicity is meant voluntary simplicity. The Gandhian viewpoint is not only simultaneously political, moral, and religious, it is also traditional and modern, simple and complex. It embodies numerous Western influences on which Gandhiji was exposed, but being rooted in ancient Indian culture and harnessing eternal and universal moral and religious principle, there is much in it that is not at all new. Excuse me. Therefore, he could say, and I quote, I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and nonviolence are as old as the hills. Mahatma Gandhi was concerned even more with the spirit than with the form. If the spirit is consistent with truth and nonviolence, the truthful and nonviolent form will automatically result. This is best seen as a harmonious blend of the traditional and modern. Gandhiji described much of his thoughts as mere common sense. The Gandhian principle of Sarva Dharma Samabhava, equality of all the religions, the integration and equality in all people of all faiths, is a call to dialogue with deep engagement within the society and ultimately with humanity. What practices do we need to engage in to promote dialogue and to promote mutuality? The daily practice of diversity, mutual respect, and discussion remains an urgent challenge for contemporary society. Gandhiji believed in cultural interdependence but not domination. He said, and I quote, I do not want my house to be walled in all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. Mine is not a religion of the prison house, but it is proof against insolence, pride of race, religion, or color. Now I will talk about Satyagraha. Gandhiji's legacy to South Africa was a method of fighting injustice. He sowed the seeds of dignity and self-confidence that even the apparently weakest sections could fight the might of governments. After a generation, that seed emerged from the ground in the form of passive resistance against racial discrimination and the apartheid regime. In South Africa, he was the leader of a minuscule Indian community. The soul searching and experimentation led him to Satyagraha. After returning to India in 1915, he had employed this method to the issues of the Indian community in as he had done in South Africa. In India, his sphere of work expanded manifold. The challenges before him were grave, and with this, his experience matured. Search for truth was the essence of his life, but truth itself appeared opaque and obscure. He came to regard the inner voice, the voice of his conscience, as truth and molded his life and action accordingly. He judged people and their perceptions through the inner voice. The quality of diligence was a part of his character since the South African years. The perseverance gave him the ability to face the most difficult challenges. He evaluated and assessed himself at every phase of the work. In fact, he searched himself every day, relentlessly. If he had any inkling of treading the wrong path, he checked himself at once, consulted with colleagues, and made the necessary changes. Gandhiji evolved the unique way of satyagraha that aims at the use of truth force, being the process of pursuit of truth, love force, as it never aims to harm or coerce the opponent, but only to convert him or her, and soul force, as it proceeds from the concept of oneness of God and humanity to change the hearts of the adversaries through self-suffering and sacrifice in the nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience. As Gandhiji has shown in his pursuit of Satyagraha from 1906 till his end, its aftermath is always better relationship among the parties. In a violent resistance, the opposite is the result. The technique of civil resistance as it was developed in South Africa between 1893 and 1914, when Gandhiji was mostly in residence there, was firstly an Indian movement of self-respect and communal cohesion. Secondly, it was against the wrongly entrenched forces of racial, economic, and professional discrimination. And thirdly, it was undertaken by and for desperate group of people originally hailing from India who lacked a rallying point and leadership. During his 20 years of stay in South Africa, Gandhiji's thought and way of life underwent significant changes. Indeed, the two became inseparable for him. Thought became meaningless for him unless it was lived out, and life was shallow unless it incarnated a carefully thought out vision of life. Every time Gandhiji came across a new idea, he asked whether it was worth living up to. If not, he took no further interest in it. But if the answer was in the affirmative, he integrated it into his way of life, experimented with its truth, and explored its moral logic. His greatest achievement was the development of the science of Satyagraha and the practice of it. Satyagraha has its basis in South Africa, but its possibilities were explored in India. Conflicts are bound to arise in human societies, as each person, group, or nation can perceive only one's or its own relative truth. We must fight against what we perceive as untruth, injustice, exploitation, and repression. Gandhiji evolved the concept and technique of nonviolent civil resistance to all such evils in South Africa while fighting against racial discrimination against Indians and then in India for freedom from the exploitative colonial rule. He gave the name Satyagraha, or holding on to truth or holding firmly to truth, to all such nonviolent resistance. Truth, nonviolence, sacrifice, and self suffering are its basic principles. The central concept in Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of Satyagraha is broadly based on nonviolence. Defined most narrowly, it is a technique or tool of nonviolent action. A Satyagraha campaign is undertaken only after all other peaceful means have proven ineffective. At its heart is nonviolence. An attempt is made to convert, persuade, or win over the opponent. It involves applying the forces of both reason and conscience simultaneously. while holding aloft the indisputable truth of his or her position. The Satyagrahi also engages in acts of voluntary self suffering. Any violence inflicted by the opponent is accepted without retaliation. But precisely because there is no retaliation, the opponent can only become morally bankrupt if violence continues to be inflicted indefinitely. Gandhiji gave this innovative method that was to be a substitute for violence. The intention was to bring about positive societal and dogmatic changes. It would do us well to remind ourselves of what Gandhiji proposed for the world. He spoke of a world that would evolve towards peace, harmony, and brotherhood. In this world, different religions, cultures, and people of the world would live together with mutual respect and tolerance rather than in suspicion and hatred. It was his alternative to the traditional theory of revolution. It was not so much a non-violent way of achieving revolutionary ends as it was a novel way of defining the very idea of revolution. Satyagraha is the extension of the rule of family to the other spheres of human interaction. Family disputes and differences are commonly settled through the law of love and accommodation and a constant effort for the promotion of family welfare. It was the appreciation of the law of domestic life, the law of love for all to the whole humanity, which Gandhiji had come to regard as his own family. Our ancient wisdom says, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is a family. Satyagraha always starts as an attempt to understand the opponent's point of view, and if the conflict is not resolved through dialogue, mediation, and compromise, then various forms of non cooperation and in the political field, even civil disobedience may be adopted. One must never obey a law against one's conscience, but a Satyagrahi also never really breaks a law because he or she openly defies the law and welcomes maximum punishment under the law for such disobedience. Gandhiji saw the spirit of compromise as an essential part of Satyagraha. The Champaran Satyagraha of 1917 in Bihar in India is a vital event in the history of India's freedom struggle. It was India's first civil disobedience movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi to protest the injustice meted out to the poorest of the tenant farmers in the Champaran district of Bihar. The cultivators were forced by Europeans to grow indigo, the blue dye, and this imposed on them untold sufferings. They could not grow the food they needed, nor did they receive adequate payment for indigo. Gandhiji had taken precautions to ensure that the struggle did not take on a political aspect. Gandhiji was aware that disinterested public work in its purest aspect is apolitical. Due to Gandhiji's Satyagraha in Champaran, the centuries old Indigo Act was abolished and it further realized three objectives. One, it gave courage and freedom from fear to a people oppressed and subjugated into silence over the centuries. Two, it provided an object lesson to his co workers in selfless service to the people. And three, it established the principle that eradication of injustice must be accompanied by constructive work. Another satyagraha was the salt satyagraha or the Dandi March. The Dandi March is the finest example of the intuitive strategy of the Satyagrahi. When life is seen as a process of unceasing evolution, no moment is more important than the other. But in a worldly sense, the Dandi March, the civil disobedience movement, the Quit India movement were among the five most important movements of Gandhiji's life. These are the most illuminating moments of India's nonviolent struggle for freedom. Time magazine had listed out three most important protests over 190 years. First one was the Boston Tea Party. The second one was the Dandi March or the Salt Satyagraha. And the third was March of Washington. We can see a common thread. The first and second were against the same company, the East India Company. There is a common thread of nonviolence in all three. In 1930, with a pinch of salt, Mahatma Gandhi shook the world. He started out on 12th March from his Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad for Dandi seashore with 79 fellow marchers, walked for 24 days, walking 10 miles a day, stopped at 48 villages, gave speeches in the morning and evening to mobilize people to participate in the salt satyagraha, covered 241 miles till he reached the Dandi seashore on 5th April. In the early morning hours of 6th April, as Gandhiji bent down to pick up a fistful of muddy lump of earth with salt, 100,000 people joined him. As the salt satyagraha progressed in the country, 300,000 people broke the salt law all over India. 1,362 newspapers covered the news. Williams Lawrence Shearer, the American journalist who was present during the salt satyagraha, and his graphic reporting of the incidents brought to the notice of the world about the barbarity of the British rulers. And the world woke up to the power of non-violence and satyagraha. So Mahatma Gandhi remains the most powerful global brand ambassador of ahimsa, non-violence, an entrepreneur, a youth icon, an apostle of peace, a man whose values can make the world a better place today. I will talk about Sarvodaya now. Gandhiji's concept of Sarvodaya, or welfare of all, delineates the social order which should result as the goal of his various concepts concerning political economy. It means that the good of the individual lies in the good of all, as well as that it means Swaraj for the weakest and the last person in a society. Gandhian concept of Sarvodaya is of economics of universal welfare. The thought or the idea of Sarvodaya does not belong to Gandhiji. It is a thought in its pristine purity. The authenticity of the thought is irrespective of the personality, capacity, and the greatness of the man from whom the thought emanates. It is true that character of the person is an inspiring factor, but the true nature and comprehension of the pure thought does not depend upon the person who puts across the thought. Sarvodaya is a term meaning universal uplift or progress of all. The term was first coined by Mahatma Gandhi as the title of his translation of John Ruskin's book on political economy called Unto This Last. He paraphrased the title as Sarvodaya, and he came to use the term for ideal of his own political philosophy. Gandhiji had received a copy of Ruskin's Unto This Last from his British friend Henry Pollock while working as a lawyer in South Africa in 1904. In his autobiography, Gandhiji remembers the 24-hour train ride to Durban when he first read the book, being so in the grip of Ruskin's ideas that he could not sleep at all. He wrote in his autobiography, and I quote, I determined to change my life in accordance with the ideals of the book. Gandhiji advanced the concept of Sarvodaya, which were based on the three basic principles that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all, that a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's, inasmuch as all have the same right of earning their livelihood from their work. Thirdly, that a life of labor, that is the life of the tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is the life worth living. He wrote in his autobiography, and I quote, the first of these I knew, the second I had dimly realized, the third had never occurred to me. Unto this last made it clear as daylight for me that the second and third were contained in the first. I arose with the dawn, ready to reduce these principles to practice. Planning for brotherhood is the very foundation of the economics of Sarvodaya. Gandhiji recommended two solutions. One, work or labor must have the status of a sacred vow. Two, making work dignified is not enough. Work must become sacred. Sarvodaya seeks not only the upliftment of all, but also the enhancement of thinking. Mahatma Gandhi was of the firm view that the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand over to them at least as it was handed over to us. In the Sarvodaya society of his dream, therefore, every member will be free from any greed for limitless acquisition of material wealth and more luxurious living, and they will follow the motto of simple living and doing their duties. He had said that everyone will thus get ample opportunity to produce and earn sufficiently through honest work for decent and dignified living. Of course, obviously, income of different persons may be different depending on their talent, ability, and effort. But those who will earn more will use the bulk of their greater earning for the good of the society. In such a society, all wealth, including land, will be assumed as common property to be utilized for the welfare of all. If an individual has more than his proportionate portion, he becomes a trustee of the excess wealth for the benefit of the less fortunate member of the society. As regards use of machinery in economic activity, Gandhiji said, and I quote, "If we feel the need of machines, we certainly will have them. But there should be no place for machines that concentrate power in a few hands and turn the masses into mere machine minders, if indeed they do not make them unemployed." In order, therefore, to minimize use of machines in a Sarvodaya society, Gandhiji strongly advocated that everyone should do some productive physical work at least to earn his or her daily bread, as was also advocated by Count Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian thinker and writer whose writings had a profound impact on Gandhiji, that everyone should uphold the dignity of labor irrespective of the type of honest labor performed by an individual. I will now tell you a little about Hind Swaraj. The quintessence of Gandhiji's thinking was contained in his seminal work titled Hind Swaraj. Its import is so revolutionary, so different from what most of us are used to, that a real paradigm shift is a basic prerequisite to grasping what he had in mind. Hind Swaraj was written by Gandhiji in 1909 and is a key to Gandhiji's thought. In a way, it is a manifesto of Sarvodaya. The years that he had spent in South Africa had given him a certain maturity. Satyagraha, constructive work, pure life, and the purity and unity of means and ends can be considered Gandhiji's thoughts. The originality of these ideas and their inviolable connection can be basic to Gandhiji's vision of life. He would evolve these ideas through his self practice during the next 40 years of his life. His life and thoughts have been ever evolving as he took these ideas to new heights. Hind Swaraj is the seed on which the tree of Gandhian thought has grown to its full stature. For those who wish to study his ideas more methodically, it remains the norm by which to assess the theoretical significance of his other writings, including the autobiography. Talking about Swaraj, I would like to say that Gandhiji linked Satyagraha to Swaraj in two ways. In Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji used Swaraj to denote both self rule and self government. Swaraj was an ideal for the individual and for the nation. To be a devotee of Satyagraha, Gandhiji said an individual had to be capable of self rule. And I quote, "Swaraj has to be experienced by each one for himself." Gandhiji laid down a code of conduct that would help individuals attain Swaraj. Every individual who chose the path of Satyagraha would learn to regulate his own life by following truth and cultivating fearlessness. A Satyagrahi leading a disciplined and ethical life would be an exemplar for other individuals, and the pursuit of such a life on the part of all individuals would be the necessary precondition for Swaraj. Swaraj at the individual level, where each person will become his own ruler, would lead to Swaraj for the nation. In Gandhiji's philosophy, Swaraj for the nation did not mean merely political independence from British rule. Swaraj for Gandhiji was something more substantive, involving the freedom of everyone to regulate their own lives without harming one another. However, to Gandhiji, the vision presented in his book Hind Swaraj was the ideal for the realization of which he had devoted his life fully. He wanted to rebuild India after the model presented there. This required much more than ending British rule. Gandhiji gives a uniquely original idea of Swaraj as rule over the self. Its key lies in the ancient tradition of India. While Gandhiji advocated the soul force as the means of attaining Swaraj, he was not only referring to self realization but also to other forms of self rule. By withdrawing support and cooperation to the British, he wished to deny them legitimacy and thereby sought to destroy the edifice of the colonial empire. Freedom or Swaraj for Gandhiji was not merely purely an and exclusively spiritual. It was simultaneously political, social, and economic. Bondage and slavery, according to him, were based on the acceptance of the values of that system that gave rise to slavery. Gandhiji argued that it is only by rejecting the values of that system that freedom and self rule could be attained. For Gandhiji, it was not only the process of self realization but also of non cooperation of the system that imposed slavery. Although the word Swaraj means self rule, Gandhiji gave it the content of an integral revolution that encompasses all spheres of life. He said, and I quote, at the individual level, Swaraj is vitally connected with the capacity for dispassionate self assessment, ceaseless self purification, and growing Swadeshi or self reliance. Politically, Swaraj is self government and not good government. In other words, it is sovereignty of the people based on pure moral authority. Economically, complete Swaraj means full economic freedom for the toiling millions. For Gandhiji, Swaraj of the people meant the sum total of the Swaraj or self rule of the individuals. So he clarified that for him, Swaraj meant freedom for the meanest of his countrymen. And in its fullest sense, Swaraj is much more than freedom from all restraints. It is actually self rule, self restraint, and could be equated with salvation. How to realize Swaraj also engaged Gandhiji's attention seriously. He reminded his colleagues that Swaraj will not drop from the cloud, and it would be the fruit of patience, perseverance, ceaseless toil, courage, and intelligent appreciation of the environment. He also reminded them that Swaraj means vast organizing ability, penetration into the villages or counties solely for the service of the people. In other words, it means national education or education of the masses. His concept of democracy was determined by the extent to which it empowered the weakest and allowed each citizen to realize his or her potential. He wanted relations between individual, society, and state to be based on nonviolence to the maximum extent possible. He favored decentralization of power and said, and I quote, individual freedom alone can make a man voluntarily surrender himself completely to the service of society. Above all, this is the searchlight that he had turned on himself for moral self improvement and personal transformation. In his constant quest for truth, lifelong endeavor for nonviolence, and the resistance on purity and the insistence on purity of means, the leadership potential that Mahatma Gandhi showed stemmed from his focus on a definite purpose, discipline, and belief system. Mahatma Gandhi must also be remembered for his ethical leadership, skill in strategic management, advocacy, planning, leading the most significant mass scale nonviolent movements, establishing hundreds of organizations for social change, and bringing about freedom for India. We can view Gandhiji as the leading strategist, a role model, and someone whose strategies can be practiced in any part of the world by the aspiring leaders. Gandhiji always emphasized self control, self vigilance, and self correction. Gandhiji's leadership qualities made him stand out among the leaders of his time and have been the primary reason why he is still so very significant today. With this, we come to the end of today's course. In the next course, on Saturday, July 3rd, I will talk about the transformational leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, his economic thoughts, and trusteeship. I once again thank the Indian Mission for hosting the course, the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, New Delhi, for their support, and above all, to all of you, my grateful thanks for participating in the first course. Now I invite one participant from each country to share their views at this point.
Hello. Namaskar. This is Himanshu.
Namaskar, Himanshu ji.
Namaskar. I'm from Singapore.
Okay.
For past 7 to 8 years, every Gandhi Jayanti, I make a drama on Mahatma Gandhi along with
Nice.
adults and children in Singapore.
Okay.
My idea being, how do I make Gandhian philosophy reach the masses in the age of iPhones and entertainment? in an entertaining way that can connect with people. But since today I am talking to somebody who knows more about Gandhiji and has devoted more time than I have, may I ask you how to make Gandhiji relatable to masses? Uh, that is my question.
The best way, in my opinion, would be by becoming a role model. Firstly, whatever you are trying to pass on, you have to practice that, and that is the best way to, communicate to others. And while and when we proceed during the course, there'll be certain ideas, there'll be certain things that you will get, with which you can imbibe more, and then definitely we will can talk more about how do you want to communicate that. One of the ways that you have said, of course, is very nice, that you put up plays and in a very simple way you try to communicate Gandhiji's principles to the masses, or maybe to the children and youth specifically. So you are on the right track. Please follow it up, and I will get back to you more with some more information.
Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting you in person in Singapore or anywhere else.
Okay. Is there any other view at this point? Any other country? Any other participant who would like to share their views? If not,
Good evening, G.
good
Shobhana G.
evening, ma'am.
I'm Maria Luisa Valdez, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences from the Philippines. And I'd like to share with you some inputs that I've learned from your talk for today. It's very interesting, very enlightening. And what I catches my attention is that Gandhiji's philosophy is actually he shows the quintessence of human existence. He focused on the ontological core of human existence, and by discovering this dimension of human existence, this will help the lives of the Filipino students. This will help their lives to be worth living, and the destiny of our country will radically change by bringing into its own human affair of a genuine spiritual dimension through the letters of Gandhiji. That's what I have learned from your talk for today.
Thank you. That's
Thank
wonderful.
you.
And to learn more and more about Gandhiji, better is to start reading up on books that he has written, on his volumes, which are 99 in number, of his complete works, which would really be very helpful and enlightening to people who are really looking for understanding much more, because he has written so much and left behind so many things apart from his life, for which he had said, "My life is my message." It's an open book. So good to go in deep about what he has written and learn more and get inspired, of course.
Yes, G. Actually, what catches my attention for today is that Sarvodaya. Is it Sarvodaya? I
Yes,
would like
Sarvodaya.
to learn more about it, and I'll try to read more about it. And the inputs that you've shared are very interesting. I've um, I've learned some inputs about nonviolence or ahimsa, Gandhiji's truth, philosophy of truth, the Satyagraha, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah, and um, I'll try to read more about what you have said about Sarvodaya. Thank you.
absolutely very nice. That's really, I'm very inspired by your views, and it's wonderful. So if there are no more for the time being in the first course, we would welcome more comments or views in the next course, and I will see you soon on next Saturday. So namaskar and thank you once again for participating in the course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ji.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.